Mira was gathering berries when the world exploded. The ground shook so violently that trees fell like grass, and a sound beyond comprehension rolled across the landscape. Not thunder, but something deeper, as if the earth itself was screaming. Her band of 43 souls on the shores of Lake Malawi had lived through earthquakes before, but this was different. In the far distance, the entire horizon turned black, a wall of darkness racing toward them faster than any storm they'd ever witnessed. The ash arrived first as a gentle snow, gray flakes that the children tried to catch on their tongues before the adults' screams stopped them. Within moments, day became night. Not the gradual darkness of sunset, but absolute blackness at midday. The temperature began dropping immediately, a cold that bit through their animal skins. Band leader Koru ordered everyone into the deepest cave, but even as they ran, the ash was already ankle-deep. The very air became thick, choking, tasting of burned stone. By the second day, 3 elders had died from breathing the poisoned air. The ash had mixed with moisture in their lungs, creating a cement-like substance. Children were dying faster, their smaller lungs unable to filter the toxic particles. Mira watched her infant nephew stop breathing, his tiny mouth filled with gray mud. They had no word for what was happening, because nothing in their ancestral memory had prepared them for this. The world wasn't just ending, it was being erased, buried in gray death. The animals died in waves. First, the insects, carpeting the ground in tiny corpses. Then birds fell from the sky mid-flight. By the 4th day, they found elephants standing frozen, suffocated while standing, their trunks filled with ash. The lake turned to gray sludge, fish floating in masses so thick you could walk across them. Every source of food was dying or dead. The band's stored nuts and dried meat would last perhaps 10 days. After that, they would join the mounting dead in this gray grave. On the 7th day, something worse than ash began falling. Pumice stones, some as large as fists. They punched through their hide shelters, killed 2 hunters instantly. The stones were hot, setting fires that couldn't spread in the ash-choked world but filled their cave with smoke. They were being attacked from above by burning rocks while drowning in ash from below. Koru made a desperate decision. They had to leave, had to find somewhere the ash hadn't reached. But where could they go when the whole sky was dead? They fashioned masks from animal bladders, creating primitive filters to breathe through. Mira discovered that wet hide wrapped around the face allowed some air through while blocking the worst ash. But movement was nearly impossible. The ash was now waist-deep in places and still falling. They moved in a line, the strongest breaking trail, passing children hand to hand. In 12 hours, they covered what usually took 1 hour to walk. 7 more died during this death march, simply sitting down and never rising. On the 10th day, they found other survivors, or what was left of them. A band of 60 had been reduced to 12, huddled in a shallow ravine. Their leader had gone mad, claiming the spirits were punishing humans for unnamed crimes. He'd killed 3 of his own people as sacrifices before the others stopped him. These survivors brought terrible news. This wasn't local. Food became the immediate crisis. The ash had poisoned everything it touched. Plants were dead or toxic. Animals that survived were eating ash-covered vegetation and dying from within. The only safe food was what had been stored before the catastrophe, and bands began fighting over caches. Mira watched as 2 groups killed each other over a bag of nuts, the winners too exhausted from fighting to escape before they too succumbed to ash inhalation. Civilization was dying along with the world itself. The cold was unprecedented. Without sun for 2 weeks now, temperatures had plummeted below anything in human memory. Water froze solid, if you could find water beneath the ash. The volcanic winter had arrived in full force. Children were dying of hypothermia, even inside caves. They burned everything combustible, including precious tools and weapons. When that ran out, they burned dried corpses of animals, then their own dead. The smoke mixed with falling ash created a toxic atmosphere barely survivable. By day 20, Mira's band of 43 was down to 15. They'd found a deep cave system that offered some protection, but even here, fine ash penetrated everything. It was in their food, their water, their lungs. Every breath was labored, every movement exhausting. But Mira noticed something. A few individuals seemed more resistant. They coughed less, breathed easier. Perhaps 1 in 10 had some natural resistance to the ash. These few became the hunters, the gatherers, the only hope for the rest. 3 months after the eruption, the sun was still invisible. The ash had stopped falling but now hung in the atmosphere, creating perpetual twilight. Plants couldn't photosynthesize. The entire food chain was collapsing. Mira had become leader after Koru's death, not through succession, but because she was one of the few still strong enough to make decisions. Their band had merged with 2 others, creating a group of 38 survivors from an original population of over 150 souls. They discovered that certain roots deep underground had survived, protected by soil from ash contamination. But finding them required exhausting digging through ash concrete. A full day's work by 3 people might yield enough calories for 1 person. They were slowly starving while working themselves to death. They weren't living anymore, just dying slowly, postponing the inevitable end. Innovation born of desperation emerged. They learned to filter water through sand and charcoal, removing enough ash to make it drinkable. They discovered that certain insects had survived in underground colonies and began farming them, eating grubs and larvae that once would have disgusted them. Most remarkably, they found that bats in deep caves had survived, and these became a primary protein source. Humanity was reduced to eating creatures of darkness because they lived in darkness themselves now. The psychological toll was devastating. Without sun, many fell into deepest depression. Suicide became common, people simply walking into the ash wastes and not returning. Others went mad, claiming to hear voices in the constant gray twilight. One woman insisted she could see the future and predicted everyone would die except 7 humans who would repopulate the world. Her prophecy seemed optimistic. 7 survivors from billions seemed impossible. Most believed humanity would simply end, another failed experiment. 6 months in, they made contact with a band that had traveled from far north. These brought impossible news. The devastation was worldwide. The entire planet was covered in ash. Coastal areas were slightly better. Ocean winds cleared some air, but inland was dead. They estimated that of every 100 humans alive before the eruption, perhaps 1 still lived, maybe fewer. The mathematics were simple and terrible. Humanity was going extinct. They were living through the final generation of their species. Disease became the second killer after starvation. In the weakened state, previously minor infections became fatal. Without medicinal plants, all dead under ash, they had no treatments. A cut meant death. Childbirth was almost uniformly fatal for mother and child. Of 12 pregnant women in the merged bands, all died, and only 1 infant survived past a week. That child, a girl they named Hope in their language, became the band's focus. If she died, it felt like the future itself would die with her. The social structure completely transformed. Previous hierarchies based on hunting skill or age became meaningless. Now, those who could breathe best led. Those who could find food were revered. A young woman who discovered how to make edible paste from tree bark became more valuable than the strongest hunter. Children who showed resistance to ash were protected above all else. They were the only possible future. The old voluntarily stopped eating, giving their shares to the young, accepting death as duty. 9 months after the eruption, the first glimpse of sun appeared. Just a pale disk visible through the ash clouds for minutes before disappearing. But it was enough to trigger celebration and tears. The sun still existed. The ash was thinning. It might take years, but blue sky might return. This tiny hope transformed everything. Suicide stopped. People began planning beyond the next meal. They started teaching children skills again, believing there might be a future where such knowledge would matter once more. They discovered other adaptation strategies through desperate experimentation. Certain fungi thrived in the ash-enriched soil. Though many were toxic, they identified 3 edible species. They learned that morning dew, collected on specially positioned hides, provided cleaner water than any ground source. They found that burning bones at extremely high temperatures created a chemical that, when mixed with water, neutralized some ash toxins. Each discovery was paid for with deaths from failed attempts. The baby Hope became a symbol beyond her tiny existence. Bands that had been hostile before the eruption brought gifts of food they couldn't spare. Her first laugh in that gray world brought grown hunters to tears. She was everyone's child, humanity's child. Her survival mattered more than any individual life. In her, they saw proof that humans could be born into this dead world and still live. Contact with coastal survivors brought crucial information. The ocean, while damaged, was recovering faster than land. Fish, though scarce, existed. Seaweed grew. Shellfish survived in deeper waters. The merged bands made a momentous decision. But staying meant slow, certain death. At least moving toward the ocean meant dying with purpose, seeking salvation rather than awaiting doom. They prepared for the exodus with grim determination. The weak and sick voluntarily stayed behind, knowing they would slow the group fatally. Elderly survivors gave their clothing and tools to the young, then walked into the ash wastes for their final journey. Parents with dying children made impossible choices. The others would remain, tending the cave until death, maintaining a waypoint in case the travelers needed to return. The journey to the coast became humanity's greatest trial. 19 souls, including baby Hope, set out through a landscape that looked like another planet. The ash had hardened into concrete-like sheets that cut through their hide wrappings. Every step required effort. Every breath was a struggle. They moved at night when possible, as the weak sun during the day turned the ash fields into reflective ovens. In the first week, they covered only 20 miles. 3 died, including a child who simply stopped breathing mid-step. Navigation was nearly impossible. All landmarks were buried. Rivers had changed course or disappeared. Mountain profiles were altered by ash accumulation. They navigated by wind patterns and the faint position of the sun through the haze. Mira discovered that certain birds, the very few that survived, were also heading coastward. Following these dying guides, they adjusted their route. Every dawn, they counted the birds. When the birds stopped appearing, they knew they were truly alone in the wasteland. Water became critical. The ash had absorbed most surface moisture, creating a dust bowl beyond imagination. They learned to dig deep pits at night, letting them fill with condensation. A full night's effort might yield a handful of muddy water. They drank their own urine, mixed with ash to neutralize the acids. They sucked moisture from the bones of dead animals they found. The baby Hope was given the cleanest water, drops carefully filtered through cloth and sand, every drop a victory against extinction. On day 15, they encountered something unprecedented, a massive die-off site where hundreds of humans had perished together. The bodies, partially preserved by ash, told a story of catastrophic exodus. These people had been fleeing inland, away from something even worse than the ashlands. Their possessions included shells and dried fish, coastal people who had chosen death in ash over something terrible at the ocean. Mira's group faced a horrible decision: continue toward unknown danger or return to certain death. They chose to continue, but now, with deeper fear. What could be worse than the ashlands? The answer came from a dying woman they found crawling inland. Through gestures and gasps, she communicated that the ocean had receded, then returned as a black wave full of boiling mud and dead things. The tsunamis had been followed by poison gas from underwater eruptions. The coast was death too, just a different kind. But having come this far, the group pressed on, hoping conditions had changed since her escape. Food ran out on day 20. They ate leather straps, boiled hide clothing, chewed ash-covered grass knowing it was toxic, but needing something in their stomachs. A rat became a feast for 19 people. The baby Hope was fed chewed food from others' mouths, her survival prioritized above all else, humanity's last hope. The psychological breaking point came when they had to choose who would eat. An injured man, unlikely to survive anyway, voluntarily stopped eating. Then another. The logic was horrible but clear. Fewer mouths meant others might reach the coast. The group developed rituals to honor these choices, creating meaning from unbearable decisions. On day 30, they saw the ocean, or what remained of it. The water was black with ash, waves gray with suspended death, but it was water, vast and promising. The beach was covered in rotting sea life, but among the decay, they found living crabs, seaweed washing ashore, signs of life persisting. 13 had made it from the original 19. They had reached sanctuary. But the coast brought new challenges. The water was largely undrinkable, too contaminated with ash and volcanic minerals. Fish were scarce and often toxic from feeding on poisoned materials. Other survivor groups were already there, and competition for resources was fierce. Battles erupted over tidal pools containing edible shellfish. Mira's group, weakened from their journey, couldn't compete physically. They had to survive through intelligence, cooperation, and the diplomatic power of having baby Hope. Proof of renewal. They learned to read the tides for maximum foraging. They discovered which seaweeds were edible by watching what few seabirds remained. They found that certain volcanic rocks, when heated and dropped in seawater, caused chemical reactions that precipitated out toxins, making the water more drinkable. The baby Hope was passed between groups, her presence reminding everyone what they were fighting to preserve: the future itself. 3 months on the coast saw their numbers stabilize. The 13 survivors had become 8, 5 more lost to disease and violence, but no one had died in the last month. They'd established sustainable foraging patterns. Hope was walking, saying her first words in a language being simplified by necessity. Her laughter on that dead beach was the sound of humanity refusing to end, persisting against impossible odds. Contact came with a boat, something that hadn't been seen since the eruption. 12 survivors from across the water, from lands that were myths, arrived on a raft of sealed gourds and driftwood. They brought news. Pockets of humans survived everywhere, all struggling, all adapting. If they could survive another year, if children like Hope could reach breeding age, humanity might recover over millennia. 2 years after Toba erupted, the sun properly broke through for a full day. The survivors, now numbering 23 after mergers with other groups, watched in religious silence as actual blue appeared in the sky. Children born after the eruption, like Hope, had never seen it. They reached toward the blue patches as if trying to touch them. The sun was weak, filtered, but it was real. The nuclear winter was breaking at last. With returning sunlight came the possibility of agriculture. Seeds that had been hoarded, protected like gold, were planted in ash-enriched soil. The volcanic minerals, once toxic in concentration, became fertilizer when diluted by rain. The first green shoots brought celebrations greater than any successful hunt. She didn't understand the significance, but the adults knew. Humanity was planting again, thinking beyond mere survival. The population dynamics were stark. Of the 23 coastal survivors, only 5 were women of childbearing age. 2 were pregnant, one from her original band, one from a merger that had created new pairings. The genetics were dangerously limited, but they had protocols: careful tracking of lineages, planned pairings to maximize diversity. They were breeding themselves like livestock, but it was necessary. Every child born healthy was celebrated by all groups. Every child that died was mourned by all humanity. Innovation accelerated with improved conditions. They developed better water filtration using layered sand, charcoal, and cloth. They created primitive greenhouses using salvaged materials and clear volcanic glass, protecting plants from acid rain. They learned that certain fish species were rapidly evolving to handle the changed ocean chemistry, evolution visible in real time. Humans were evolving too. Those with better lung filtration, stronger immune systems, and higher caloric efficiency survived and reproduced. Hope became central to their emerging culture. As one of the first children born after the catastrophe to survive past infancy, she was studied, protected, and mythologized. Stories were already forming about her birth during the darkest time, her first steps on dead earth, her first words being light when the sun returned. She wasn't just a child, but a symbol of adaptation. Her DNA would be crucial for humanity's future. She carried whatever mutations had allowed her survival in the poisoned world. Contact with inland groups brought disturbing news. Some communities had survived through cannibalism, creating cultures where this was normalized. Others had developed extreme religions, believing the eruption was divine punishment requiring constant sacrifice. Mira's coastal group had to decide: unite with everyone for genetic diversity, or maintain standards that might limit their breeding pool but preserve their humanity. They chose a middle path: trade with all groups, but breeding partnerships only with those maintaining certain values. This created the first post-apocalyptic ethics: no cannibalism, no human sacrifice, no abandonment of children, and surprisingly, no hoarding of resources. Communities that pooled resources survived. Those that competed internally collapsed. Cooperation had become humanity's primary survival trait, encoded in new cultural DNA. 5 years post-eruption, the first successful harvest occurred. 17 plants, carefully tended, produced seeds. It was nothing compared to pre-eruption abundance, but it was agriculture returning. Children were taught counting through seeds, their first lessons being about investment in tomorrow. Education itself was rebuilt around agricultural recovery. The ocean gradually cleaned itself. Volcanic minerals, initially toxic, became nutrients for explosive algae growth once the chemistry balanced. This fed small fish, which fed larger fish. The survivors learned to read these blooms, following them for best fishing. They developed sophisticated understanding of marine cycles, knowledge that would have taken generations before, but was compressed into years by necessity. Every survivor was a scientist, testing hypotheses with their lives, recording what worked. Hope's first pregnancy at 15 was a global event for the remaining humans. The father was from a group 300 miles away, the pairing carefully planned for genetic diversity. Her successful delivery of twins, unprecedented in the post-eruption world, suggested that the second generation was stronger. These children of children represented phase 2 of recovery. If they could survive and reproduce, humanity had a chance. The twins were named Dawn and Dusk, marking the transition from darkness to light. 20 years after Toba, the human population had grown to an estimated 10,000 worldwide. Still catastrophically low, but growing. Communities were establishing trade routes, sharing innovations, and most importantly, exchanging breeding partners. Languages were merging into simpler forms for easier communication. Technologies were standardized. Humanity was unconsciously creating a more unified species from the bottleneck. The genetic and cultural diversity lost was tragic, but what emerged was adapted for the new world. Mira, now elderly, lived to see the first trees return, not the original species, but new ones evolved from ash-resistant seeds. She saw Hope's children have children. She witnessed the ocean turn blue again in spots. On her final day, she gathered the third generation and told them the complete story. How the world ended, how almost everyone died, how the few survived through cooperation and innovation. She made them promise to remember and record it. "We are the children of catastrophe," she said. "We exist because a few refuse to surrender." Hope, now a grandmother herself, established the tradition of Ash Day, annual remembrance of the eruption. Communities would darken their fires and sit in darkness for one night, remembering. Children were taught the numbers, millions before, thousands after, tens of thousands now. They learned the names of the original survivors, the 19 who attempted the death march, the 13 who reached the coast. The recovery accelerated exponentially. 50 years post-eruption, primitive agriculture supported permanent settlements. The ocean teemed with evolved life. Birth rates increased as nutrition improved. Genetic bottlenecks were carefully managed through systematic breeding programs that would have seemed dystopian before, but were necessary now. Every pregnancy was tracked, recorded, its genetics mapped against all others. Humanity was consciously evolving itself, selecting for traits that matched the new world. Archaeological evidence from this period would puzzle future scientists. Sudden technological regression followed by rapid directed advancement. Genetic markers showing extreme bottlenecking. Cultural artifacts suggesting worldwide uniformity from previous diversity. Homo sapiens almost ended, but emerged transformed. The ash layers in geological records would tell of the eruption, but only DNA would reveal how close extinction had come. The final lesson of Toba was carved into stone at every settlement. From 10,000 to millions before. From millions to thousands in fire. From thousands to millions again through cooperation. We are the survivors. We are the adapters. We are the children of ash who refuse to die. This message, found in various forms across the post-Toba world, became humanity's first universal truth. Not religious or cultural, but mathematical and historical. The species had faced its end and calculated its way back.